The longer that I read and teach Blood Meridian, the more that I realize my focus goes to the kid. And when I was younger, my first focus was on kind of the drama of evil in the book. Um, when I got a little bit older, my focus was on what I could learn in terms of geopolitics in the book. Uh, a little more time passed, and I got interested in political theology of it. Um, Asking the question of what can I learn from this about the nature of good and the nature of evil, and sort of the Odyssey type questions. But you would think that, you know, with more time as a teacher and as a researcher, and I teach this every semester for 3 years now, that I would become more complex or more sophisticated in my view of the book. That I would be able to maybe connect up some more systematic account or something like that. At least that's what I would have thought. But it's as if the longer I read and teach, the more simple my thoughts become. And the simplicity of it, I think, might be useful, um, because I'm starting to realize that I haven't spent time the way I should thinking about the kid. I mean, obviously, I've thought about him and I've thought about his fate. I've thought about his beginnings. I've thought about, the different actions he takes. I've thought about, how much does he collude um, with the evil of the book. But, you know, my mind keeps going back to the first words of the novel. See the child, see the child. Probably other people figured this out before me. But I mean, it's a directive. See the child. Um, watch him closely. And I think, for me at least, it's like a new dimension of everything in the book is illuminated. Um, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times readers and scholars get stuck on the question of how he dies. And I mean, obviously, that will shed a lot of light on the whole book and on his character. But what really kind of brought my mind to where it is now is by watching the judge, which, you know, unfortunately, that's where my mind and my interest went for a long time. And I say unfortunately because now, like I said, that time has passed. I realize the centrality of seeing the child. And by looking at the judge as much as I have to be able to teach this and to be working on the research that I've been working on for a while, mm, it means I've missed the child. I've missed the kid. The kid teaches us something key about what can limit the judge, what boundary there is for his evil. And I think maybe more than anything, the kid gives a kind of answer to the problem of evil, which is why I read the book in the first place. The judge obviously is of that type of evil that is driven by the lust for domination. If you're familiar with Augustine, he talks about these different desires that humans have, and there's three kinds. There's the love of God, um, love of glory, and love of domination, or lust for domination. That last one is the most base, and it's the thing that characterizes evil. Um, in terms of, if you're trying to understand evil's nature, or its impulse, or the satanic impulse, it's a specific type of evil that wants to dominate. It wants to destroy. It's not an instrumental evil. It's not an evil that wants to have the praise of others, or wants to have unlimited riches, or wants to have territory or land. I mean, obviously, these things can be encompassed in the lust for domination, but there's a type of evil where, you want praise, you want fame, you want land, you want wealth, and so you go along with the destruction of others or the harming of others because you are doing it for the sake of a different end. And you're happy to do it to get that. Now, that's evil, obviously, but that's not what the lust for domination is. That is not that darkest kind of evil. The darkest kind for Augustine is one where the desire, the love is for the domination of another in itself. Okay, it is to destroy. Uh, that's the whole point. That's the thing. That's the love, and that's different. Um, that's a different kind of evil. The depth is much greater. And someone who wants to destroy, I've worked on this, actually, I've published on this a bit, right? Augustine's always expressing that in terms of rape, the lust for domination in terms of rape. Why? Well, it's obvious in some ways. This is a form of domination. But this particular form of violence, particular form of domination, and this is part of what I try to express in the work I've done, is to possess the other person. To basically break into their body, break into their self. To, in a way, if you've studied the result, the way that this hurts people who survive it, to always live in the mind of that person. There's an aspect of the lust for domination that is about possession, of trying to take over another person and consume them. Augustine pushes back on this, sort of pagan idea that the Christians inherit, that when someone is a victim of SA, that they could be seen as committing adultery unless they expiate that through suicide. And even some early church fathers agree with this, like Augustine's own teacher, St. Ambrose did. They viewed women who went through that and then took their own lives as martyrs. Augustine is the one who says, wait, no, that makes no sense. The reason he can sort through this is because he recognizes that there's a part of ourself that only God sees, a part of us that it's between us and God only. Um, he'll call this the conscience. And whatever someone does to your body, they can't reach that part. They can't possess that part. That part has to be something you give, you hand over. And you can hand it over to evil, and you, ideally, for Augustine, can hand it over to God, right? To bring out your true nature, to magnify what is good in you. And so, for Augustine, I think part of the reason that SA plays such a big role in what he does is because it's a really important moment for showing how humans can resist evil, how they can escape evil, how even when someone comes in to possess them, in to dominate them, there is a part of them that cannot be taken, right? There's a part of us that is ours to give. That's really important to understand, I think, for reading Blood Meridian. And I think specifically it's important for us to understand if we're going to understand why McCarthy wants us to see the child. He wants us to see the child because for some reason, the kid understands there's a part of himself that belongs to him. And he won't give it to the judge. The judge, driven by lust for domination, he says this at different points in the text, that he doesn't use the expression lust for domination, but he talks about wanting to capture men at their meridian, right? He says men are not like flowers, they're not like nature, in that those things flower and then die over time. He says there's this glorious thing of man hitting his pinnacle, his meridian, and in the process of hitting that, which of course you hit it for him through violence, which is the ultimate game and the worship of the god of war. As soon as the man, or I guess woman, hits it, their meridian, they immediately pass into death, into dying. And he says it's that I want. It is getting someone to that point and then being present, and the implication is scooping up the person, the soul, as they crash right down. No matter what heights that they reached. So someone like Lanton, who's a great example of that more instrumental form of evil, at least at first, cruelty, violence, in some ways it seems like an efficient violence, pragmatism about the violence. He, for a lot of time, seems motivated by getting the bounty, right? By other external goals. And he's willing to do all types of terrible things to do that. But someone like that falls into the trap of the judge. He's waiting there like a spider because he's that even deeper form of evil that wants the destruction in itself and wants the possession of the other soul. It wants to consume it, right? Lust for domination. So let's go back to the kid. Why is he so central? He's central because how does this child who grows up with nothing and with no one, there's no memory of love or goodness, no sense of him mattering, to keep him inside on some sort of different path, on some sort of noble intent. There's nothing like that. You know, he's been neglected. His father knows how to read. His father is a schoolmaster formerly, and's passed on none of this knowledge to the kid. He's completely on his own. How does someone like that not just become another runner on the path of destruction that the judge sets out, right? And then, the judge waits and yanks up his soul at the end. Well, okay, you could say the judge does get him in the end, but does he really? If what the judge wants is the possession of the soul. Now, I'll bracket that because I don't, I, I, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and everyone has thoughts on that, and that's kind of the big question of all of the texts in a lot of ways. What does the death really mean? But how does the kid not just or I'll put it this way. How does the kid become the one to thwart the judge? That's definitely how the judge sees him. Especially if you think about the scene between the two of them in the jail. Why would he be capable of this? And what is the this I'm referring to? Probably at this point it's best to go to the text. So let me get it out, because I think it'll give us a little bit of a insight. Going back through the streets, past the yellow window lights and barking dogs, he, the kid, encountered a detachment of soldiers. But they took him for an older man in the dark, and they passed on. He entered a tavern and sat in a darkened corner, watching the groups of men at the table. No one asked him what he wanted in that place. He seemed to be waiting for someone to come for him, and after a while, 4 soldiers entered and arrested him. They didn't even ask him his name. In his cell, he began to speak with a strange urgency of things few men have seen in a lifetime, and his jailer said that his mind had come uncottered by the acts of blood in which he'd participated. One morning he woke to find the judge standing at his cage, hat in hand, smiling down at him. He was dressed in a suit of gray linen, and he wore new polished boots. His coat was unbuttoned, and in his waistcoat he carried a watch chain and a stick pen, and in his belt a leather-covered clip that held a small, silver-mounted derringer stocked in rosewood. He looked down the hallway of the crude mud building and donned the hat and smiled again at the prisoner. So, to refresh your memory, if you haven't read this in a while, by the time that he's jailed, which is after the massacre at Yuma, he's, in my mind, he's had some significant changes as a character, or he's committed actions that are notable. He's an outlier in the group, and that's important because of the rest of the place this part of the text takes us. He removes the arrow from Davy Brown's leg. He hides Shelby when he was supposed to kill him. He's had 2 chances to kill the judge in the desert when they're being chased by him, and he doesn't take them. He also says something kind of revelatory to Toadvine when Toadvine goes with the judge, and the kid is going to go with the priest. He tells Toadvine, "It ain't country you've run out of." So the person he's becoming is different than the person we began with, and the instances I named are important. Important developments in who he is, especially because remember that during the tarot scene early on, I think it's chapter 5, he pulls a card, the 4 of Cups, and it's inverted. And the meaning behind it, and I'm not an expert on this, but what I understand from what I've read and then from like what other scholars say is that that card inverted means that someone is at a sort of crossroads, a time where they really need to change, right? To become what what they need to be to, I guess, save their life, or at least to engage in self-reflection, self-knowledge, accountability, to turn things around, to turn their fate around, is how I'd put it. And so in chapter 5, that's the card he gets. And all the things I've described, with Brown, with Shelby, his, time in the desert, opportunities to kill the judge, those are signs for us that he is engaging in the type of behavior that the card indicated he needs to engage in to get off of an evil fate. He is engaging in introspection, at least it seems like he must have, because of the drastic change. It's incrementally written, right? But the drastic change in the types of things he does. That's who he is when we get to this part of the text. So I just wanted to make that clear. "Well," he said, the judge said, "how are you?" The kid didn't answer. "They wanted to know from me if you were always crazy," said the judge. "They said it was the country. The country turned them out." "Where's Tobin?" "I told them that the Cretan had been a respected doctor of divinity from Harvard College as recently as March of this year. That his wits had stood him as far west as the Aquarius Mountains. It was the ensuing country that carried them off, together with his clothes." Just want to point out that I think this is interesting from the perspective of what I was saying earlier about the judge sort of enjoying collecting people. in their destruction, right? Uh, Somehow Tobin went from this pinnacle of being a respected doctor of divinity as recently as March of that year and has completely collapsed into this moral mess that apparently the judge has devoured. So that's an example of what I'm suggesting, um, the MO of the judges. And Toadvine and Brown, where are they? In the desert where you left them. A cruel thing, your companions in arms. The judge shook his head. What do they aim to do with me? I believe it is their intention to hang you. What did you tell them? So, going back just over the first part of the exchange, the thing that struck me, uh, the judge first asked the kid how he is. Now, no one in his right mind, the judge, of course, doesn't actually want to know if he's well or not. So, in a way, by switching to asking where Tobin is, it's a way of, sort of pushing back on this faux intimacy, faux care that the judge is showing. Even if that's the case, though, it is interesting, I think, that the very first thing the kid wants to know is where Tobin is. He clearly, because he asked the judge this in a little bit down the page, what's going to happen to me? You know, he clearly is trying to figure out if he's going to be hung, if he's going to be executed, what he's in jail for, um, and what they think he did, what they have evidence of. But that's not the first thing he asks the judge. The very first thing he asks is where his companion is. And Tobin is a mixed figure in a lot of ways, but he's the closest to a mentor that the kid had. After he asks after Tobin, he asks after Toadvine and Brown. What I think this shows us is that the kid is becoming someone who can think about his friends before he can think about himself, who is wanting to know if they're hurt and if they're dead. That's his first priority because he must love them. And if he's asking that before he's asking about his own fate, he has to love them. The judge is so satanic. I think it's this entire interaction, it shows you that satanic habit of trying to ferret out what it is that matters the most to the other person. So you know how to manipulate them and you know how to destroy them. So because the kid has asked about his friends, you could imagine, right, that the judge knows a good angle for stabbing at the kid's heart when he says, in response to the kid's question about Toadvine and Brown, that they're in the desert where you left them. This is your fault. A cruel thing. Your companions in arms. The judge shook his head. Now he asks about himself. What do they aim to do with me? I believe it is their intention to hang you. The kid wants to know, what did you tell them? Like, why are they killing me? And here's something really interesting. Told them the truth. That you were the person responsible. Not that we have all the details. But they understand that it was you and none other who shaped events along such a calamitous course, eventuating in the massacre at the ford by the savages with whom you conspired. Means and ends are of little moment here, idle speculations. But even though you carry the draft of your murderous plan with you to the grave, it will none the less be known in all its infamy to your Maker. And as that is so, shall it be made known to the least of men. All in the fullness of time. You're the one that's crazy, said the kid. There's a lot that's interesting here. The first is that there's a sense, obviously, in which the judge is lying. Not surprising, right? Because he uses words to craft realities as opposed to using words to describe realities. That's a really important part of his character. But he's also telling the truth in a different way. So, in the one sense, he's lying. Like, we already know because we've read the book that the kid didn't do any of those things, that he's not some mastermind, right, of the Glanton gang that led them all to this horrible massacre in the end and betrayed them to this death. The way that the judge describes it is that he says, "You're the one who shaped events along such a calamitous course, eventuating in the massacre." So he's saying, you're the force, the thing that took the gang on this murderous path. And, with the culmination, the climax of the massacre. So we know that's not true. That you were the person responsible. We know that's not true. But from the perspective of the judge, the kid can be said to be all these things with some sincerity. And I think maybe as we keep talking, we'll know more about why. I think it's really fascinating that the kid's response to this, he never talks, or he hardly talks. But the response to this very manipulative and delusional, little speech on the part of the kid is to say to the judge, "You're the one that's crazy." This is interesting because, the judge started off by saying, they think you're crazy. Your jailers think you're crazy. The desert turns people crazy. Tobin went crazy, but in that little, monologue about, that you were the person responsible, there's no mention of craziness. In fact, he would sound to be very, intentional and organized. But there's no mention of craziness. The kids, he doesn't get drawn into a refutation of the characterization. He doesn't say he's a liar, or he doesn't say I'm innocent. What he says is, "You're crazy." He rejects the judge's attempt to set reality, right? To set the framework of the conversation by calling it crazy, right? The judge smiled. "No," he said, "it was never me. But why lurk here in the shadows? Come here where we can talk, you and me." One thing the judge said is that the kid is the one responsible. He says that you were the person responsible. By calling him crazy and having that be his only response, the kid says, "You're the one that's crazy." He's refusing responsibility for this. And he can with a clear conscience. He's not avoiding accountability. And if the card was true, the tarot card was true, what the kid had to do to avoid a disastrous fate was to become an accountable person. Um, so by telling the judge that he's crazy, he is in a way sort of following through on this ethos of accountability, because he's reminding the judge that this is not this is not on his hands, on the kid's hands, and implying, I think, that it's the judge who should be accountable. The judge picks up on this because he says, no, it was never me, rejecting the accountability. I think that's the thrust of that there. But why lurk here in the shadows? Come here where we can talk, you and me. The kid stood against the far wall, hardly more than a shadow himself. The jail is the cell he's in. The kid, it was described by McCarthy as a cage. So right now he's like a caged animal. But he's a caged animal with a predator outside, right? Trying to get their prey. And as much as he can within that cage, which represents, I think, the ways in which our freedom as humans is so limited in a material sense. Because I get the sense with a kid sometimes that his freedom, in a spiritual sense, what he represents is the unlimited nature, the unbounded nature of our spirit, how free it can be. His body is almost as unfree as it can be, and he's in this tiny space, and then he's trying to get away from this predator in that tiny space. The only thing he can do is to back up against the wall, trying to become as small as possible, hardly more than a shadow himself. You're trying to disappear into the wall like Homer Simpson. Okay. Physically, he is trapped. He's physically absolutely unfree nearly. Come up, said the judge. Come up, for I've yet more to tell you. He looked down the hallway. Okay, so he wants to see who's coming. Don't be afraid, he said. I'll speak softly. It's not for the world's ears, but for yours only. Let me see you. Don't you know that I'd have loved you like a son? I have another video that my computer ate and that I will try to get somehow, that focuses a lot on seeing the child as a fatherless and motherless boy. And I said that the judge has this particular satanic capacity, which is to identify what it is the other person wants, what it is that will lead to their undoing, that he can manipulate them through. And anyone you've known who's really evil, anyone you've known who is very abusive, they have that ability. They can read what it is that you want, and they can use that to hurt you in some way. What does the kid want most of all? The more I read, and I try to do it from the perspective of seeing the child, the more that I realize what he wants most of all is a dad. And his father failed in every possible respect. What is a dad? What is a dad supposed to be? What's a dad supposed to do? Um, I think in terms of archetypes or in terms just of human roles, what a father represents is someone who can look at that dangerous world out there where you're their child and you're vulnerable and you need protection, and they will keep you safe with their life. They protect you with their body, with their provision. I'm not saying moms don't do this. Obviously, I'm a mom. I feel the same way, but we're thinking in terms of archetypes, characteristics. Um, a father's job is to create a place of safety and certainty in a world that is cruel. This is why when a father becomes a predator, it is one of the most evil things that can happen. And it's one of the things that can just destroy someone if they have a father like that. A father who abandons his role of protector and provider is basically leaving their kid to the wolves. Now, we're resilient and the kid's resilient. I actually think that that's one of the things that you can take away from the book, is that someone like the kid, it's we see great human depravity in the book, but there's also a hint, gesture toward our resilience and our ability to grow when there's nothing to grow with. What does the kid need most of all? If you go back to the first page when McCarthy tells us to see the child, he's poorly dressed, he's freezing, he's malnourished, and his father is sitting on his ass drunk. And the kid is having to stoke the scullery fire to keep himself warm, which is very unnatural. If your parent is there when you're a kid and you're shivering, they may not be able to afford to get heat or clothes, but they'll do anything to keep you warm. You're not going to be the one stoking the fire if your parents love you, um, while you're shivering like that. Your dad's going to do it for you. Your mom's going to do it for you. Well, this dad does not do that. He sits on his ass drunk. And even though that's what he's doing, the kid is described as looking at his father, right? While he's stoking the fire to keep himself warm. He's watching his dad. Even if his dad cannot do what he needs to do for him, his eyes are still on his father. What does a kid need? What does he want most of all? What's the thing that has hurt him the most not to have? It's a dad. So if you're thinking about this from the perspective of the judge's diabolical psychology, saying in this moment, don't be afraid. I'll speak softly. It's not for the world's ears, but for yours only. Let me see you. Don't you know that I'd have loved you like a son? What did he want to be? The kid wanted to be a son who was loved, to be seen by his father and protected by his father. And this is what the judge offers in this moment. But we all know what it would mean for him to be the kid's father. And it would mean everything we've talked about so far. about this desire to see people at their meridian and then snatch away their soul. But we also know that the judge is a sexual predator, and it would surely entail that. Now, he's reaching his hand through the bars, which fits with that sexual predation. Fatherhood, in the figure of the judge, is connected to consuming the child, like Kronos consuming his children, and using the child, seeing it only as an extension of himself to get what he wants, which is the spreading of bloodshed throughout the world. And it also means having a father who will sexually abuse you. That's the type of father the judge is. That's the type of father he represents. And I think a part of this story is an indictment of what I think McCarthy is struggling with, an indictment of this idea of a world where there's a missing protector father. What is there in this world is this satanic father, the judge, right? He reaches through the bars. Come here, he said, let me touch you. The price of love from this type of father is that you let him touch you. Okay, and there's a lot of cases of abuse where someone is chosen to be abused because there's no one in their life who loves them, and they can't get any attention and they can't get any affection. And so, in a confusing way, that abuse is the closest thing they can get to attention and affection. And some might say that McCarthy might understand that someone might let you take care of them when they're very young and very needy in exchange for letting you touch them. The kid stood with his back to the wall. Come here if you're not afraid, whispered the judge. I ain't afraid of you. The judge smiled. He spoke softly into the dim mud cubicle. It's interesting because after trying to get the kid, kid's at a low moment, right? He's in physical pain. He's delirious. He's just found out his friends are dead. He's probably going to be executed. What does the judge offer him? He makes the approach, right, of offering him this perversion of the thing that the kid has always wanted and never had. Once that's rejected, he finds a different tactic. The judge finds it again. And it's kind of taunting. Come here if you're not afraid, right? Come here if you're not afraid. And the kid says, I ain't afraid of you. And whether or not that's true, it's another sign, I think, of what makes the kid become great, which is that he has this defiance in him of the judge. The judge smiled. He spoke softly into the dim mud cubicle. You came forward, he said, to take part in a work, but you were a witness against yourself. You sat in judgment on your own deeds. You put your own allowances before the judgments of history, and you broke with the body of which you were pledged apart and poisoned it in all its enterprise. Hear me, man. I spoke in the desert for you and you only, and you turned a deaf ear to me. If war is not holy, man is nothing but antic clay. Even the Cretan acted in good faith according to his parts, for it was required of no man to give more than he possessed, nor was any man's share compared to another's. Only each was called upon to empty out his heart into the common, and one did not. Can you tell me who that one was? It was you, whispered the kid. You were the one. The judge watched him through the bars. He shook his head. What joins men together, he said, is not the sharing of bread, but the sharing of enemies. What has the kid done? Everything that I told you about in this sort of transformative stage for the kid's development. He takes the arrow out of Davy. He hides Shelby. These are acts of risk and, defiance of orders that are not in the kid's interest. They can actually end up getting him hurt or killed. He won't shoot the judge in the back. What has he lived like? He is much closer to living like someone who shares bread than shares enemies. That's the thing he's introduced into the group, into the Glanton gang, that, as the judge says, you poisoned it in all its enterprises. He poisoned it because he moved from being someone who is a part of a society that he pays into it and participates in it through the sharing of enemies, and he's started to become someone who is engaging relationally like someone who's sharing bread. And that spoiled all of the Glanton gang for the purposes the judge wanted, right? Of capturing them at their meridian. What joins men together, he said, is not the sharing of bread, but the sharing of enemies. But if I was your enemy, with whom would you have shared me? With whom? The priest? Where is he now? Look at me. Our animosities were formed and waiting before ever we two met. Yet even so, you could have changed it all. I think that's a part of that line always stays with me. Our animosities were formed and waiting before ever we two met. The kid is someone who represents some other way than what the ancient way of the judge is. Some other alternative. I mean, here it seems to maybe be characterized as the sharing of enemies versus the sharing of bread. He's an avatar of some opposite force of the judge. Yet even so, you could have changed it all. You, said the kid. It was you. It was never me, said the judge. Listen to me. Do you think Glannon was a fool? Don't you know he'd have killed you? I've always thought that this part is interesting, because, for example, when he says, don't be afraid, the kid says, I ain't afraid of you. And he smiles. He does the judge smile thing. Same thing with when the kid calls him crazy. The judge smiled. Okay. But after he gives his little speech about war is holy, or we are just antic clay as men, then he says, can you tell me who didn't put their heart in the common? And kid says again, it was you. So he does this thing I pointed out earlier. You're the one that's crazy, said the kid. He's throwing it back on him. You. He's putting the judge in a corner by making the judge accountable. Now, can he actually make the judge accountable? No. I mean, clearly the judge is some sort of like Tolpic or Gnostic type thing, right? Is he going to have some type of power that rivals the judge in a material way? No. But what he's doing, we've seen him throw it back at him each time. You are the one. He won't let the judge get away with shifting the characterization of anything, of any description he makes here, either about the nature of the world or the intention of the kid or anything like that. He's flipping it back all the time. You, right? And when he says that part about, can you tell me who that one was? When the judge says that, and the kid does his little, it was you. You were the one. The judge is pissed. He doesn't do his little smile thing. That's part of my point. Okay, so you have the exchange, and then the judge smiles, and he's like, smile, right? Which we always know he's evil. When he smiles, it's like a bad sign. That's a sign some bad thing's coming. I ain't afraid of you. The judge smiles, right? This time, when the kid has his retort, he doesn't do his little smile. He keeps talking. He's like, with joints meant together, he said, is not the sharing bread. So he's, to me, this is like he's getting off his game, right? And then I think again, when that little speech ends about our animosities were formed and waiting before we ever met, right? And the kid goes, after all that, you, said the kid, it was you. He seems really impatient and frustrated, the judge does. That next constant refrain on the part of the kid of it was you, accusing him. He's not letting the judge judge him. He's judging the judge. And it's making the judge pissed. It was never me. So the judge, to talk like that with the kid is to, in some sense, be talking to him like he's on your level. He's an equal. We haven't seen that happen between the judge and him. He just does his little smile thing, right? And for a bit, he's doing that with the kid. You know, he always seems to be in the one of the control of the conversation. None at this point. It was never me, said the judge. Listen to me. Like he's losing the control of the flow of the conversation. Listen to me. Do you think Lanton was a fool? Don't you know he'd have killed you? Lies, said the kid. Lies, by God, lies. Think again, said the judge. He never took part in your craziness. I never know how to interpret that part. The judge smiled, okay, and then he's back on his smiling stuff. He took his watch from his waistcoat and opened it and held it to the failing light. For even if you should have stood your ground, he said, yet what ground was it? He looked up. He pressed the case shut and restored the instrument to his person. Time to be going, he said. I have errands. The kid closed his eyes. When he opened them, the judge was gone. That whole scene, I'm sure someone else has said this, to me is very reminiscent of when Satan is on the mountain with Christ, or in the desert with Christ, and is tempting him. And every time He doesn't give in to the temptation. Christ doesn't. And eventually, he is so exhausted by that encounter, even though he's victorious at rejecting the devil, that he kind of collapses in his strength and angels come to tend to him. I've always thought that part where the judge goes, "Time to be going. I have errands," and the kid closes his eyes. It even more, right, adds to the way this seems to be like the temptation of Christ in the desert. When he opened them, the judge was gone. That night he called the corporal to him, and they sat on either side of the bars, while the kid told the soldier of the hoard of gold and silver coins hid in the mountains not far from this place. He talked for a long time. The corporal had set the candle on the floor between them, and he watched him as one might watch a glib and lying child. When he was finished, the corporal arose, took the candle with him, leaving him in the darkness. He was released 2 days later. A Spanish priest had come to baptize him and had flung water at him through the bars like a priest casting out spirits. So, if his encounter with the judge is like a temptation, a trying of the kid that exhausts him, and then he passes out, there's another way to look at this that's Christological, which is that, Jesus' final trial, of course, is the crucifixion. The final sort of thing he has to do to save us is the crucifixion. And when is he resurrected? He's resurrected on the third day. So you could see this encounter with the judge, where the kid has fought so hard. You could see that like a crucifixion, or like the day of the crucifixion, the Good Friday. And then in 2 days, because we know that day finished, right? And then the 2 days are described separately, because the soldier comes and talks to him and then leaves him in the darkness after listening to him for a while. So the kid fell asleep in the night, right? He's released 2 days after that. 2 days, till Christ resurrected. In case you need more evidence, the Spanish priest comes to baptize him on that day, which would be the third day, like a priest casting out spirits. An hour later, when they came for him, he grew giddy with fear. So now he's thinking, they've baptized me, I am about to die, I'm about to be executed. But instead, he's taken before the mayor, and this man, or the mayor type judge figure, is speaking to him in a fatherly manner. Like, not a fatherly manner like the sort of father that the judge is, but like a real father. But he's speaking to him in Spanish, so I don't know if he's going to get it. And this man spoke to him in a fatherly manner in the Spanish language, and then he was turned out into the streets. Okay, the doctor that he found was a young man of good family from the east. He cut open his trouser leg with scissors, looked at the blackened shaft of the arrow, and moved it about. A soft fistula had formed about it. "Do you have any pain?" he said. The kid didn't answer. He pressed about the wound with his thumb. He said that he could perform the surgery. It would cost $100. The kid rose from the table and limped out. The day following, as he sat in the plaza, a boy came and led him again to the shack behind the hotel. The doctor told him they'd operate in the morning. Right? And then his body's tended to. He's going to be cared for. He's given a bath and surgeries performed on him. Gets rid of this festering wound, getting a chance to heal. Um, what makes the kid kind of emblematic to me of the thing that can resist the judge, or the force that can resist the judge, is that two things, right? One is that he's become someone who shares bread instead of enemies. And the other is, we know to become the person that shares bread instead of enemies, he had to engage in a transformation that came from taking accountability and taking responsibility for what he was doing. That's what the inverted Four of Cups represents. He engages in introspection, and he becomes a sharer of bread because he did that. Um, and because he did that, he's also able to resist the judge. From that vantage point, he cannot get sucked into any of the false promises that the judge represents. And also, he can judge the judge. He can stand there and with clarity, because he's taken on his own form of accountability, though he's got to do that more, as we're going to see in the encounter he has with the abuelita just a few pages later. In the practice of taking accountability, he has become someone who can see when others don't take accountability. And his success, his triumph over the judge in this engagement, is through his constant refrain of you, you're the one, right? The accusation, the forcing of a confrontation with accountability uh, on the part of the judge that the kid tries to do. These are the things that make him someone who we should think about, who we should see. We should see the child. We should look at that. And we should look at that as an antidote for ourselves, right? In our attempts to be people who are sharers of bread, or our attempts to be people who can resist and confront